What is going on, YouTube? Today we're going to be going over all the tips and tricks you need to know to beat the Forsaken Giant boss, whether you're solo or in a group. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. First, we're going to start off with a few general tips. When you first start the fight, it will look like there is some cover that you can hide behind. Don't get fooled. Once the fight starts, that entire area gets blocked off, and there's actually no cover to use throughout the entire fight. The arena is broken up into 3 sections: left, center, and right. For the most part, you want to try to stay in the center section of the arena. As you'll come to find out, the boss has a giant sweeping attack that covers about 80% of the arena. This can be a very hard attack to read. And because of that, if you are too far out of position, you will get hit by this attack every time. Staying in the center of the arena helps, because even if you're a little slow to react, you should still have time to get out of the way of the attack. Soon you'll learn about some tiers that the boss drops. You will use these throughout the fight as they help with the stagger mechanic. Outside of staggering the boss, they really have no other use. Essentially, they do next to no damage, and going out of your way to pick them up is just a loss in DPS overall. Unless you're using them to stagger the boss, completely ignore them. Throughout the fight, the boss will periodically spawn Gnawers. The main purpose of these seems to be to distract you and force you to take your eyes off of the boss. You would think, given the boss's enormous size, that even if you're focusing on these ads, you would easily be able to see the telegraphed attacks coming. That isn't always the case. Be careful not to hyper focus on these ads, as it will put you in a position to miss a telegraph from the boss. And no matter how annoying these ads are, the boss does way more damage. Only mess with the ads if you know that you are safe to do so. One last thing to note, the whole idea of this fight is to shoot the boss's glowing red spots to do damage. While there are actual optimal DPS windows, basically any time that you are in a safe spot and see part of the boss's body glowing red, you should go ahead and put damage in. The point of this guide will be to show you the mechanics and where I found to be the most optimal large DPS windows. But that does not mean those are the only DPS periods. I know that I personally found myself dumping DPS anytime that I was safe to do so and had a viable target on the boss. Now, having said that, let's jump in and talk about the phases of the fight. One of the first things you'll notice about the boss is it likes to cover its face and cry. When the boss cries, it cries tears of giant flower buds. Outside of that, it also spawns in Gnawers at this point. Keep in mind that the Gnawers are not a huge threat, and you do actually have time to try to burn them down when they're being spawned. Especially the very first round, you will not be able to stagger the boss, so go ahead and try to take out as many of these Gnawers as you can before the boss stops crying. Now, once the boss stops crying, sometimes it'll cover its stomach like it has a really bad tummy ache. At this time, grab one of the tears that fell on the ground and throw it at the boss's stomach. The tear itself will not do a lot of damage, but it will actually trigger a stun mechanic. This is a great time to pour in the DPS and really utilize this downtime. If for whatever reason you don't have any tears on the ground, you can still DPS the boss while its hands are over its stomach. Just know that you need to try to shoot around the hands a little bit, and the DPS window will be a little bit shorter. The biggest rule of thumb here is just don't overcommit. If you can't get the stun off, that's absolutely fine. Go ahead and just get the DPS out that you can. Overcommitting to try to get the stun could lead you to not getting the stun and not putting out any DPS. Use your best judgment, but when in doubt, just pour the DPS out. After the crying mechanic, the boss will do a ground pound and an AoE. Keep your eye on the boss when you see his hand start to raise, and pick a direction and run. Your goal is to be running, that way the ground pound misses where you're at. After about a second or so, you will notice a shockwave emit from that area. After you give it a second, jump up into the air and hover, and that should get you over the shockwave. One big thing to note here is that the jumping potion or the frog leg potion will help get you in the air long enough that you won't have to worry about this attack. At this point, the boss will just continue this cycle. One thing to note is, if you still have tears on the ground from when the boss was crying previously, you can actually throw one of those tears at the boss's head while it's crying. This will force it to cancel the cry animation and stun lock it, which lets you get in some decent DPS again. Once you lower the boss's health enough, you trigger what I consider to be phase 2. In phase 2, the boss will spawn in 4 flying deviants, an arbiter, and some Gnawers. When this happens, focus your fire on downing all 4 flyers first thing. They can buff/heal the arbiter, as well as shoot ranged attacks at you. These fuckers are super annoying, and you need to get rid of them at all cost. Don't get me wrong, the arbiter is a pain in the ass, but you can kite him fairly easily for now. Also, this is a great time to use your own combat deviant to help keep the arbiter busy while you're working on everything else. After you kill the 4 flyers, there is a chance that the big boy may have a tummy ache again. If this happens, capitalize on it and toss a tear at him. If you don't have a tear, don't worry about it. Use this period to put in some solid DPS on the boss. At this point, don't worry about the arbiter. Your deviation should be keeping it busy long enough for you to put in some DPS. Now, whether you did DPS or not, a new mechanic is going to show up. You will actually see the big tree disappear and notice a giant red light on top of you. Basically, this is a telegraph for a massive arm smash that is about to happen. Remember earlier we talked about the arena being broken up into 3 sections? Well, there's actually a reason for that. This attack can break one or multiple of those sections. Your goal here is to try to spread these attacks out across the arena. Typically, I would just pick one spot and stay there and run circles until the telegraph is over. Once the light disappears, run the hell away from that section because a giant attack is inbound. This is also a great time to burn down the arbiter if you still have it up. Basically, while the smash attack is coming in and you have a little bit of downtime, focus on the arbiter if you haven't already killed it. This will happen 2 or 3 times, and afterwards you move on to the next part of the cycle. Now, this part is very similar to phase 1. The tree punches the ground, then swipes, then cries, but instead of having a gassy tummy, he has a new mechanic. In this new mechanic, he puts his hands out in front of him and creates a blood ball, and also spews smaller blood blobs that chase you down and hurt like hell. Basically, there are way too many of these to stand your ground and try to shoot out of the sky. The play here is literally just to run from them. Don't worry though, this is one of the few times in the game that you can actually outrun projectiles. After all of the little blood balls have been shot, he will toss one giant ball at you. As long as you've been running the whole time, you should miss every one of these attacks. After the blood balls, you just rinse and repeat this process and make sure to put in DPS anytime that you can. Also, one thing to note here is that you cannot stun the boss when he's tossing the blood balls at you. The only chance you have for a successful stun DPS section is when he's crying. When he cries is the only time that you can stun him in this phase. Once you get him down to about half health, he'll spawn another set of 4 flying deviants, an arbiter, and some Gnawers. Do this the exact same way you did it earlier and you should be perfectly fine. After you clear that out, it'll go right back into the loop of the second phase. Once he's down to about the last 25% of his health, he does get another new mechanic. Basically, some red goop starts shooting up from the floor. Ultimately, standing in these does do some slight damage and slows your movement down. Good news is they don't track you, so you can just kind of weave around them until they despawn. Once they do despawn, the boss goes back into their primary loot, which is now smash, blood balls, swipe, then cry. For the smash, blood balls, and the swipe, avoid them like you always have in the past. The cry mechanic now has the new goop pools being spawned. During this time, avoid the pools and put in DPS as fast as you can. And having said that, all you have to do is rinse and repeat until the boss is dead. This fight can be a little overwhelming, especially by yourself. Hopefully understanding the mechanics going into the fight will help you succeed when you go in and try to take out the boss. If you have any additional tips, feel free to leave them down in the comments for everybody else. Thanks for watching, and as always, have a great day.